Hi everyone, I'm with Sam Chan today, who has just authored a new book, Topical Preaching in a Complex World. It looks great. I'm going to read it over my holidays, and it didn't win Australian Christian Book of the Year. Someone else
And my other book didn't win Australian Christian Book of the Year either, because some way more gifted person wrote a way better book for our times. And that person was you, Steve. So congratulations on you winning the Australian Book of the Year.
Oh, thank you. He didn't have to mention it. But anyway, Topical Preaching in a Complex World. How to proclaim truth and relevance at the same time. That feels like we don't. We either proclaim truth or relevance. What's the issue?
Yeah, of course, it's a false dichotomy. Do I go for truth? Do I go for relevance? And of course, we all know there are certain tribes in Christianity. I think if I go for relevance, well, at some stage, I have sold out on the truth of the Bible.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I feel like in our stable, it's you've got to take your oatmeal, you've got to take your big chunky expository Bible passages, like long passages of the Bible, and then explain it all very quickly. Are you saying that topical preaching's been overlooked and we haven't done it as well as we could?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is we all do topical preaching, whether we like it or not, and whether we're conscious of the fact that we do it or not. It's just all in different proportions and different ratios. So let's go for a spectrum. So even if we go expository preaching, where we just give only the Bible, at some stage we have to choose a passage, like this passage over that passage. So we've already made some sort of subjective interpretive decision. And then when the organization that asks us to preach, they say, can you give us a title? Well, at that moment, by giving a title, we've already gone topical. And if we believe we should have an introduction and a conclusion that begins in our audience's world and ends in the world of the audience, again, we've gone topical at the start and the end. So there are elements of topical preaching in all our sermons, whether we like it or not. So this book just makes us more conscious, more aware that we are doing it. So we may as well do it well.
So what's the problem with modern day preaching, do you reckon? Is there a problem, or are we hitting it out of the park?
But your preaching is fantastic, Stephen. There's no problem with your preaching. Well, it's the whole both and thing. We need to know how to exegete the Bible. And if you go to a Bible college, you have 3 to 5 years of learning biblical exegesis, but we also need to know how to exegete our world, so how to preach significance. I love the philosopher E.D. Hirsch. He talks about the relationship between meaning and significance. There's an objective, authorial intended objective meaning, yes, but there's a contemporary audience-specific significance. So the example I give is the weather report says today's going to be 25 Celsius, blue skies, not raining. That's an objective, authorial intended meaning, but it'll have a different significance depending on whether you're a farmer planting crops, a couple planning an outdoors wedding, or you're a painter who wants to paint the deck. And interestingly, John the Baptist, when he preached his message of the kingdom of God and repentance, when the crowds came to him, he gave a different specific significance application to the crowds, the Pharisees, the tax collectors, and the soldiers. So we can have one meaning, but we can have multiple significances. I think we've concentrated so much on what is the meaning of the original passage. Yes, but what is the significance for my audience today?
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, look, preaching in the past, everyone says, well, this is what evangelical preaching's like, but I don't think Spurgeon preached a lot like we do today in our sort of tradition, did he?
That's right. And so my co-author, Malcolm Gill, who wrote half the book, he spends a great chapter showing how, all these heroes of preaching, Spurgeon and so on, all their sermons are completely different from how we preach now. So I actually have a little aside in my book on how the medium determines the form and content. So much of our preaching, the 20 to 40 minute sermon, works because we're preaching in a specific setting, e.g. a church building on a Sunday to a captive audience where it's rude to walk out of the middle of your sermon, right? And often it's done in a classroom or university lecture hall. So therefore we have a form of presentation which is quite didactic and propositional, which fits the context. But much of our preaching has been determined by our context way more than we realize.
Yeah, or care to admit, because we sort of think we've theologized it, and we don't realize that the building shapes us as well.
So we've absolutized what is really a cultural preference, and then we've made it a tribal badge marker. In the book, I even have this little aside on why is a pop song 3 minutes and 30 seconds? Why has that been a pop song? Why is it 3 minutes, 30 seconds? And I learned this from a New York Times article. Apparently, it's the length of time that fits on a vinyl 78 RPM record. And it has a specific form, verse, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, chorus, chorus. Why? Because again, it's a captive audience, someone listening in their car or someone sitting in their couch listening to your song. But now the average length of a pop song is something like 1 minute, because the medium has changed. TikTok, Spotify, they need to get you to listen to right to the end to count as a hit, as a click. And so now the music is chorus, chorus, chorus. And I'm saying there is no canonical must do it this way form of a sermon, but somehow we have absolutized it must be 20 to 40 minutes. Why? Because it worked in a church setting. But you know, if you preach in a high school chapel like I do, which is only 10 minutes, or if you preach in a crew ski camp like I do at lunchtime, you're going to think, you know, a 40-minute didactic propositional sermon may not work in this setting. And now if we preach to video, which we have to, whether we like it or not, audiences log off within 30 seconds if they don't like what you have to say. So you better get to what you have to say much earlier than what we used to.
Well, that means I'm going to shorten this video quite dramatically. But the other word, complex world. So you're saying we're in a complex world. So it's complex digitally or technologically. It's also complex culturally. So how does topical preaching help us in the complexities of the cultural stuff we're going through at the moment?
Yeah, that's right. So complex in that we're often preaching to two different audiences at once, two different mediums at once, and maybe two different cultures at once. I think because now we're learning to be receptor orientated rather than sender orientated. So when we're sender orientated, this is how this information makes sense to me, the preacher. It's how it came to me in the form of a commentary. It's how I learned it in Bible college. But how does my audience need this information laid out for them? And that's what topical preaching helps us to do. Like, how would they understand this at the range of ideas, concepts, applications?
And someone coming into a church after a busy week isn't necessarily tuned in to the way you've been thinking all week either, have they?
Oh, totally. And that's why your books are so amazing, Steve, because people are saying, oh, finally, someone who gets what I'm going through on a Monday to Friday in a way that maybe a full-time Christian worker is not getting.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting that John Calvin said that God lisps to us to make us understand. Yet somehow we go, well, then I'll preach like John Calvin in 21st century Sydney or Perth, rather than saying, what was his understanding of how you should. He probably preached, and it was a common way of understanding for his time. And now we have to change the way we do that.
That's right. So John Calvin says, you know, for those who aren't familiar, God accommodates himself to our audience, to his audience when he reveals himself in the same way a nursing mother might lift, because apparently that's how you talk to a baby, baby talk, right?
Yeah.
So God does baby talk to us. He accommodates himself to us. So we too can do the same, but somehow we have this highbrow elitist view that no, the audience must accommodate itself to me because, you know, what, are they going soft on the truth? No, you don't have to be soft on the truth, but you can still accommodate yourself at the same time. It's a whole John 1, the word became flesh. We too can accommodate our sermons to our audience where they are.
Well, if you've got in the last couple of minutes here, a few tips for what preaching in the next 5 to 10 years might have to look like if we're going to accommodate to the audience that we have.
Oh, a few tips. Well, I think just realize, just be kinder to our audience. The average person who turned up to hear us, they probably had to fight through 40 minutes of traffic, look for parking, you know, walk 10 blocks to get to where we are. They're exhausted. They've had a horrible week. They're probably just going there to set a good example to their kids or to keep their spouse happy or their mother-in-law happy. So just be kinder to them and work really hard at being in their world and seeing and hearing things from their point of view.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think just starting there. And how's your preaching been going? As you've been writing this book, has it changed the way you preach? You go, oh, my, I hit my blind spots.
I love it. So it's the whole growth mindset. Turn a threat into an opportunity, convert a challenge and a crisis into a chance to grow and improve. And I think COVID and talking to camera has forced all of us to pivot, and that's a way overused word, and think, okay, this is a chance now to re-examine the form, the medium of preaching, and how can preaching adapt. And I was just thinking, you know, Paul got stuck in prison, and we all think, oh, that's horrible. Paul was stuck in prison, but it forced him to have to write letters instead of speaking to people face to face. Well, that's what COVID did to us. We could no longer meet face to face. And I know there's a whole theology of, you know, being face to face and in community, but somehow it forced us to adapt and preach to a camera. And I think it's just been wonderful. Just thinking, hey, if I only have 5 or 10 minutes, 1 minute before someone logs off, or screaming kids in the background, you know, who are distracted, how do I now have to change my preaching to fit the form and medium?
That's great, Sam. And it seems like the world will keep changing very quickly in rapid, discontinuous change. So we've got to keep thinking about it. Do you think it's up for 2022 Australian Christian Book of the Year? Or do you think there's going to be an outlier?
Only if nobody else writes a book in 2022, it might be in with a chance. And definitely you write a book, Steve. My book has no chance.
Oh, shucks. Hey, Sam, that was about as long as the sermon you're going to preach on Sunday. So we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Sam. Topical Preaching in a Complex World by Sam Chan and Malcolm Gill. Probably available at every good bookstore in Coorong as well. Yep. Good.
That's right.
Thanks, Sam. See ya.
Thanks, Steve. See ya.